Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We apologize for the volume of the video, but we will now begin our webinar for today. Welcome to Jagged's first online event. My name is Salim Al-Suwaidi and I'm delighted to be introducing to you all our first Jagged event focused on the Rhodes Scholarship with our guests here today, our 4 Emirati Rhodes Scholars. Now, just to give you a background to what Jagged is and what our platform is, Jagged is an edtech startup that has the goal of igniting ambitions and developing high impact within the MENA region. Jagged leverages on technology to reimagine the way that high school students seek guidance and receive help. Our goal is to provide accessible and personalized mentorship to high school students in the UAE and help them get into their preferred universities, then help them with their transition into university life and higher education. We employ a swipe to match model, which connects high schoolers with current university students who best suit their profiles. We also then recommend highly personalized content to our students via smart algorithms. Jagged strives to be the #1 content provider and platform in the UAE for any student wishing to study both locally and abroad. We hope to spread the Jagged message and get both high school students and university students signing up. So if you're a high school student with us today, please sign up to our mentee sign up form. And if you're a student, a university student or employed and are interested in the Jagged platform, and as well as participating in our mentorship, please fill out the mailing list form. All our links can be available through the QR code that is currently on my screen, or by visiting our Jagged Instagram at jagged.world and clicking the link in the bio to find all the links that I've mentioned today. To begin, I'd like to introduce our panelists that we have with us today. First, we have Abdullah Al-Hashmi, who graduated from NYUAD with a BA in Economics and Philosophy and is studying currently a Master's in Economics for Development at Oxford. We also have Amal Al-Gargawi, who studied a BA in SRPP at NYUAD and is currently studying a Master's in Comparative and International Education, as well as a Master's in Evidence-Based Social Intervention and Policy Evaluation. Our third panelist is Mohammed Al-Sharid, who studied at Khalifa University Abu Dhabi and graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering and is currently pursuing a doctorate in philosophy and engineering science. And lastly, we have Meitha Al-Marmari, and she has completed actually a Master's in Comparative International Education and a Master's in Public Policy, having pursued a BA in SRPP at NYUAD. Throughout our event today, you will have the opportunity to interact with our panelists, have discussions with them, and ask questions. Just make sure to continue sending messages either through the chat feature or through specifically using our Q&A feature on the webinar today. And then throughout the presentation, you will have the opportunity to speak and introduce your questions. But for now, I will hand it over to Meitha, who will be moderating the discussion for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Salim. That was a great introduction. And I hope everyone is excited about Jagged and all the cool things they're going to be doing in the UAE with regards to mentorship and helping everyone transition from high school to higher education. On that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a quick introduction onto the Rhodes Scholarship. This is going to be a PowerPoint, and then we're going to remove that. The idea is that this discussion is going to be a bit more casual than the usual Rhodes Scholarship informative sessions. And what we want to do is we want to pause after we tackle each topic and hear questions from the audience. And you guys can either send your questions in the Q&A option or in the chat box, or if you'd like, we can unmute you and you can ask your question. But the idea is that this is more conversational than like an informative session about what is Rhodes, who is Rhodes, how to get in and whatnot. We honestly just want to answer most of the questions that you guys have about this. Okay, less talking from me. I'm going to quickly introduce what the Rhodes Scholarship is. First of all, what is the Rhodes Scholarship? It's a scholarship that is fully funded, postgraduate award that enables young people from around the world to study at the University of Oxford. Specifically in the UAE, it's open to all Emiratis who have studied anywhere, either in the UAE or abroad, but it's also open to any expatriate students studying in the UAE. So it's not just for Emiratis, it's for everyone who has studied in the UAE or Emiratis who have studied abroad. And it's fully funded for 2 or 3 years, depending on the program that you pick, to study at Oxford. The next question is, what can you study? Honestly, everything. So if you go to the Oxford graduate course, pick whatever course you want. You can study it at using the Rhodes Scholarship. But these are some examples that we have right here. Environmental change management. I'm not going to try and say this word, but it's basically muscle sciences, computer science, historical studies. We have examples with us today. Abdullah, who's studying economics, Muhammad, who's doing a DPhil, Emel, who is doing social policy intervention, and then myself, who did education. Next is, so what do you need to be a Rhodes Scholar? Here are some examples of Rhodes Scholars. We have Hamel Gbesi, Majid Al-Maktoum Amal. And basically, to be a Rhodes Scholar, you just need to have a cause that you are passionate about, something that you want to stand up for, something that you want to change, whether it's in your community or the globe. And finally, how to apply. There are 2 links that we're providing here, but we're also going to be sharing a handout. So make sure you sign up for our mailing list on our Instagram. And it's going to have a lot of these things that we just presented. And this video is also going to be uploaded. And I think between the 4 of us here today, we're also very approachable if you guys have specific questions about your interests, and we'd be more than happy to help. Okay, now that we're done with the formalities, I think we can stop the presentation. And I'm gonna start with the discussion that we plan to have with all of you. So to start off, I just wanna set the scene with what is Rhodes. I personally didn't know about Rhodes until I joined NYU Abu Dhabi and heard about it. And honestly, when I joined NYU Abu Dhabi, there were only 2 Rhodes Scholars that were announced. And so it was a new thing to begin with. But recently, when I'm finished my graduate studies and I'm applying for jobs, I want to share a funny story that I had in one of my interviews. It was with a governmental entity, and they basically asked me, so is your scholarship with the transport entity? Are you legally bound to work with them? And they literally thought Rhodes meant Shuara, like this is a scholarship that I'm on. And so I had to explain what Rhodes is, its history, how it got to the UAE, and previous award scholars as well. So I think it's a new scholarship, but because we live in this NYU Abu Dhabi bubble where we hear about Rhodes Scholars every year, it becomes very weird for us to hear that other people don't know about it. And so I'm gonna ask the first question to Muhammad, who is our only non-NYU Abu Dhabi Rhodes Scholar with us today. Muhammad, how did you hear about Rhodes?
Thank you, Metha, for the introduction and the presentation first. But so I think for me, it was, so I too did not know what Rhodes was. And as many other students all over universities in the UAE, I don't know what the Rhodes Scholarship was. But I remember in 2015, we had an admin official in Khalifa University. And she was, because she was American, she was responsible for organizing internships based in the US for Khalifa University students. And at the time, she was helping me out with an internship in the US. And it's through that that she got to know me. And then she asked me, why not apply for this scholarship, which was back in 2015. And I was very flattered that she thought that I could do it, because at the time I did not know what Rhodes was. I had to look it up and search all about it. And it was a bit overwhelming when I first found out about it. But at the time, I kind of pushed it to the side, mainly because I was not going to graduate in time. So this was for the class of 2016, which was not when I was going to graduate. Fast forward a year later, she asked me again, what are you planning on doing after you graduate? And she told me, and I told her that I'm planning on going to grad school. And then she encouraged me again, why not apply for Rhodes? What do you have to lose? So I'm very grateful for her to push me to apply. And that goes to show that you really need supportive mentors around you. Interesting thing as well is the internship that I was doing is really relevant to my PhD as well. So she had a hand in, indirectly, she had a hand of directing my career path. Very interesting coincidence.
That's amazing. And I think, I don't know if this is a generalization, so if anyone disagrees, feel free to stop me. But I think a lot of us are very grateful for the mentors that we've had throughout our academic careers, for helping us get to Oxford or even hear about Rhodes or get to Rhodes. To give a little bit of background, the Rhodes Scholarship is actually was founded 100 years ago or even more, by a man named Cecil Rhodes. And I want to ask Abdullah, did you know who Cecil Rhodes is before applying? I personally didn't. Like, I had to research who this person is and understand his history, to understand why the scholarship was called Rhodes Scholarship to begin with.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Metha, for directing this question to me. And like you, I didn't know about the scholarship before coming to NYU Abu Dhabi. When I came, I heard about it, and naturally, I had the question, why is it called the Rhodes Scholarship? And so first I asked a couple of friends, and some of them knew who he was, but they didn't know why it was related to him. And so I looked him up, and basically what I found out was that Cecil Rhodes was a 19th century British politician and businessman that was heavily involved in British imperialism, and specifically the British colonies in Southern Africa. So he was famous for being the prime minister of the Cape Colonies, modern day South Africa. And I think just by giving you these facts, you can kind of discern that Cecil Rhodes might have been, or at least we might look at him today as a problematic figure, or he might have engaged in some problematic practices. And so then you might have the question, why is the scholarship related to him? And why is it named after him? And it's specifically because one of his dying wishes was to create a trust for students to promote education for students, but for a specific goal. And that specific goal was to prepare people for civil service. And so over the 100 years, the scholarship has survived. And it's important to note that it's much larger than Cecil Rhodes today. Yes, it started with him, and yes, it still carries his name. But today, the scholarship brings people together from all over the world, and it doesn't discriminate based on race, cultural identity, ideology, religion, gender. And the goal of it is to bring people together from all over the world to share our experiences, have diverse cross-cultural dialogue, and to speak about global issues, and even potentially collaborate over those global issues. And I need to note that the Rhodes Scholarship and the Rhodes Trust itself doesn't shy away from this history of Cecil Rhodes. The opposite, in fact. They've been very proactive about speaking about this history, trying to understand it. And so, again, to point out, the scholarship is much larger than just Cecil Rhodes. Thank you.
Agreed. And I think all of us as Rhodes Scholars can also attest to that. A lot of our conversations actually, question and try to understand and deconstruct what it means to be under the scholarship in this 21st century and how it got started. On that, I wanted to ask Amal a question about, Rhodes is a very famous scholarship internationally. However, locally, and I think even internationally, there are a lot of other scholarships that bring you into postgraduate education. And it would be great if Amal can share a few thoughts on that and elaborate on it.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Metha, and thank you, Salim, for the presentation. As you know, there are quite a few amount of scholarships out there. There's the 9 Tennessee Scholarship based at Stanford. There's the Fulbright Scholarship, which is sort of a US-wide program. There's the Schwarzman Scholarship in China. And of course, there's the UAE's Ministry of Education Scholarship, which is quite broad. And they all have their merits and they all have their localities, but I think I chose the Rhodes Scholarship ultimately for 2 main reasons. And the first being, I believed that it would allow me to engage with this eclectic, diverse cohort of young minds from all around the world who are really interested in making a real impact in sort of a diverse amount of areas. So I think the fact that it's a lifelong fellowship, that you could continue to engage with this resource after you graduate, is something that was quite appealing to me. The second reason was given the affiliation of the scholarship to the university, I was very interested in working with some of the faculty and research centers here at Oxford, and I think that was a very compelling motive. I also take pride in knowing that the UAE Rhodes Scholarship specifically is endorsed by Sheikha Salama bint Hamdan Al Nahyan, and her foundation is, permanently endows this scholarship. There is no wrong answer. Ultimately, like, your decision on what scholarship to apply to rests on whether it aligns with your own like professional, academic, and personal interests.
I agree. There are so many roads to postgraduate studies, and this can be the Rhodes Scholarship or any other scholarship, or even looking at universities outside of Oxford that would align with, like what Emil mentioned, your research or the topics that you're interested in, and those are popular, areas or universities that are doing research in that area. Okay, with that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions on what is Rhodes, scholarships that are for postgraduate studies. We have a few on the Q&A function, so I'm gonna say those, but in the meantime, if anyone wants to actually open up their mic and have a question, you can raise your hand, and I think Salim or John would be able to unmute you after we answer this question. So the first question I have is, and Amal, Abdullah, or Muhammad, feel free to answer it, is I'm a freshman at NYU Abu Dhabi. How would you recommend finding a mentor? Would be great to hear how each one of you found your mentors.
I think in my case, I don't necessarily think I had an official person that I officially gave the title of mentor in my head. There was a collection of people, and they all contributed in pointing me towards the direction that I was going to. So very influential was the admin official I told you guys about earlier. My supervisor during the internship was also very influential, and as well as some of my professors who were involved in my graduation project, because they all kind of, I mean, obviously the field of computer engineering is so broad, but they all kind of helped guide me towards a path that I felt was most appropriate for me. So I think I'd answer this question by don't think of finding that just one person. Try to reach out and ask for help from as many people around you that are willing to help you.
I agree. And just building on what Muhammad is saying, a mentor doesn't need to be an official employee. I know I had mentors that were my mentors, and whether it was career or personal life or future aspirations, that weren't necessarily employed at NYU Abu Dhabi. They were people who I had met either in my internships or even personal connections, and within your personal people I looked up to and valued their opinion. So I think, just to emphasize what Muhammad was saying, you don't need to have one mentor, but you can also, have various people that can have opinions on different things. Just building on that, there was another question that says, can you tell us a bit more about your mentors and how did they help you? Abdullah or Amal, do you want to share a story?
Yeah, I definitely heed Muhammad and Maitha's comments on mentorship and how there's no one person in your mind. I think freshman year, I had gone to one of my professor's office hours, and we had a conversation that sort of extended beyond the content taught. And I think that's how I developed my first, mentorship. I think the way in which they helped me was that, like, this professor who, is in the field of literature, just far beyond my own professional interest, later helped me prepare a mock interview when I became a finalist. And so I was very grateful to see how my freshman year, first semester professor later sort of helped me finish off. And so in some ways they could give you advice on where to start looking. They can, help you with mock interviews. They could sort of just, be a kind ear to listen to if you have any worries as well. So it's good to sort of proactively reach out via email. I know it's COVID and sort of office hours aren't in person anymore, but you could always schedule short meetings to talk about various issues with them.
Great. Thank you so much, Emil. And I think that also hits on a point that your mentor doesn't have to be from the same field that you're specifically interested in, because there's so much insight that can come from people who are in other fields. So there are a lot of questions that are coming in. One specific one was that, do you think schools and universities in the UAE inform their students enough about prestigious international scholarships such as Rhodes, Fulbright, etc.? If not, do you think there needs to be a larger push? I'm gonna plug in Jagged here shamelessly because I think there's definitely effort, but I don't know if it reaches the masses. And I guess that's a gap that Jagged is trying to fill. And I think there's also, I don't want to say a responsibility on individuals, but because we're not the spokesperson for scholarships, but I think if you within your network know that there are people who are of high caliber and would fit into certain scholarships, it's great for you to recommend them to look into it or research about it, because then I know a lot of my friends who applied for Rhodes didn't know about Rhodes until I told them about it. And this could be a gap in their higher education. But it's also great that we have these networks to share these experiences and like scholarships that we think might be relevant to our friends as well. So some of these questions talk about what extracurriculars do you need, what are requirements to be a Rhodes Scholar, and things like that, which is, I think, our second topic. So I'm going to move on to that one. And I hope it answers some of the questions I have here on this side. So just to summarize a little bit what the application entails specifically for Rhodes. Also, sorry, break. There are a lot of questions here about other scholarships. I personally, and I think I speak for the most of us on this panel, I don't think we feel comfortable talking about other scholarships. We do feel comfortable talking about Rhodes because it's an application that we've been through and we can talk from personal experience. But if you're asking for specific scholarships, there might be other platforms that might be useful. And if you reach out to us individually later, we might be able to help you with that. But the session is specifically going to be talking about Rhodes. So on that, the Rhodes application has two parts. The first part, the deadline is usually the end of September, and it opens up in June or July. And the application entails a personal statement, which is of 1,000 words, and a CV, which can be 2 to 3 pages. And in the CV, they expect you to list all your extracurricular and professional experiences, and then 4 or 5 recommendation letters that are recommendations either based on your academics or your character. Sorry, you need to have both, like both academic and character recommendations. On that, I think the most difficult part of the application is the 1,000 word personal statement, because you are suddenly asked to summarize your whole life, your whole passions, all your dreams, all your aspirations into 1,000 words. And I know the 4 of us on this panel all struggled with it. So on that, I want to ask, first of all, Abdullah, when you were writing your personal statement, what was challenging and what are your tips on overcoming that?
Awesome. Yeah, so I think for me, the most challenging thing was, again, like, and I think this is for everyone, how much it constrains you, and the 1,000 word limit, or the 1,000 word limit. And for me specifically, the issue was that, you know, at NYUAD, I had gained a lot of experiences in varying fields, and I developed varying research and career interests, and I just didn't know how to communicate all of that to the Rhodes Scholarship, that I had these varying interests. And so what I did was I went to the college advisor and I explained this issue to him, and he said, okay, that's fine. And then he walked up to his whiteboard and he was like, okay, let's list down all of your experiences, let's list down all of your goals, and let's see what we come up with. And he said, let's focus on your goals mostly, because it seems like we're going to be able to fit most of your experiences into the personal statement, but we're not sure about your goals. And so he lists them down, and he says, you know what? I feel like there's a string that ties all of these goals and aspirations together. And I very much agreed. I said, yes, it seems like there's a set of values that I see is, let's say, activated by these different goals and ambitions. And he said, okay, you shouldn't think of the scholarship of the personal statement as a biography of Abdal al-Hashmi. That's not what it is. It's more like, let's say, a two-page document that's supposed to convey a vision of yours that, yeah, and that's okay, that activates a vision of yours that speaks to one of your values. And so let's say if you have 10 or 15 different ambitions, a lot of goals in your life, which feels like an impossible task, and it very well might be, what you're supposed to do is pick one or two, or however many of those goals that you have, and you write about them, and you make sure that the way in which you make it flow is through focusing on your values. And I don't think this is the only way to write a personal statement. There are probably more, but it was very helpful for me, especially given that I observed that most of my goals and most of my experiences had this specific set of values that tied them together, to follow a value-based approach to the personal statement. And it proved very helpful for me.
Do you mind if I push you a little bit and you tell us, because this is a question on the Q&A that has popped up multiple times. What was the value that you chose? Like, what's Abdullah's story, if we can say?
So through the extracurricular experiences that I had gone through, I was part of the Boys Education Network, which I have to thank Metha for, because I remember one day in my sophomore year, she was like, hey, you're interested in education? Why not go for this volunteering experience? And so I had done that. I was also interning at a place that looked at education and employment. And when I studied economics, I also focused on human capital and its effects on economic growth. And so a big value of mine was just improving access to education and improving educational quality and observing its effects on economic growth and prosperity, as well as, I'd say, inclusive economic growth and increasing of welfare in general. And so those were the two values that I had kind of focused on.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Abdullah. I'm going to move on to Amal. And the multiple iterations that you mentioned you've worked on with your personal statement. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, I remember I was sitting in a coffee shop with one of my friends who was applying to a different Rhodes constituency, and we were writing our first drafts. So I had written my first draft after looking at my CV and thinking about how I could make a compelling narrative based on what I've done. And it just didn't seem honest at that time. That first draft really didn't sit well with me. And so it was really a chance for me to reflect on what I wanted to do in my future, and like what Abdullah said, like what my values are and how I can best embody that within that 1,000-word paper. It took me quite a few iterations to get to a place where I can say, well, I'm happy for anyone to read this, right? It took me 12 to 14 drafts of agony and anxiety of like, wordplay, and is this the best way to phrase something? I think unfortunately not everyone's awarded the scholarship, but thankfully we all get this chance to reflect on ourselves and reimagine our futures.
That definitely resonates with me, Amal. I think in my writing experience, I felt a bit performative because I was just always trying to match it with my CV rather than just not necessarily pouring your heart out, but like, being true to what you value, like Abdullah said, and trying to find a link within or a cause in the global world, but also our context. On that, Muhammad, I wanted to ask you, because you come from the engineering background and you previously have shared that like it was very difficult for you to think in that way, or at least start off. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm going to let you share your story with the personal statement.
Yeah. I think the thing that I first noticed when I was writing the personal statement was that it was a very different experience for me just preparing that, because even when we need to write, a couple of pages about ourselves in a research proposal or something like that, we wouldn't really be talking about ourselves as much as we would be talking about what our skills are, what we want to achieve in whatever project, what kind of training we've completed. So that sort of thing is what we usually write about. So this was very different for me because I realized I needed to talk more about who I am as a person, what my passions and interests are, how do they push me to become a better person, how do they push me to fight the world's fight, which is one of the Rhodes Scholarship's key phrases. And in the process of writing that, I was always worried that this did not necessarily sound very or up to the standard of what they'd expect of a Rhodes Scholar, because it was a new experience. I'd already written stuff like a very detailed CV of what I've accomplished rather than who is Mohammed. So I also kind of agree with what Abdullah and Emil said about trying to, you need to identify what your values are, and eventually you'll have to rewrite personal statement multiple times until you find the version that just sits right with you. But I think in the end, what you need to do is you just need to write something that you feel happy with. You feel that this reflects who you are, it reflects what you want to do, and it's true to your experience, both academic and your life experience overall.
I definitely agree with you. I think a lot of us, when we first start with the personal statement, we try to craft like a perfect story of how we got to where we got and how we're going to fight the world to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. But in the end, the one that we end up submitting is so different from the initial one that we start with. So a lot of the attendees are interested in knowing our personal stories, and I've already put Abdullah on the spot to share that. Mohammed or Amal, do you want to share a bit about your personal statements?
If Emil doesn't mind me going first, I'll go first. So I think my personal statement, the key word was curiosity. And I talked about how I always had, or I always exhibited, I was just a really curious kid as a child. And this, showed itself in the number of questions I'd ask to my parents, to my teachers, to my professors. And it also was the reason that really drove me to want to understand why things are the way they are, how things work, that sort of thing. And I tied it all up with the idea that it's this curiosity that is the reason that I want to continue graduate school, and in hope of trying to help humanity answer some of the biggest questions. So that was one of the primary, I think, themes of my personal statement. I also remember tying it up with one of my interests and how that interest, which was writing, helps. I mean, you answer a question by writing, or I suppose you can speak it as well. But I kind of tied my passion with my primary abstract value. And I think that was the way I felt was best to talk about who I was as a person at the time, and still am. Yes.
I think that resonates with me a lot. I think curiosity is a big fuel for what I do on a day-to-day basis, of just wanting to answer not just big questions about the world, but like wanting to learn more about our world, how it works, us as human beings, how do we socialize with one another, what are our underlying customs and values and how they originate. Emel, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a different question, which I think is still a bit personal. A lot of people are asking about how did we choose our recommenders? So if you don't mind sharing your story with that.
Yeah, of course. I had actually just reverted back to mentors that I thought had a better understanding of me, people who not only knew my academic potential, but also my character. I also reflected, I sort of remember how I struggled with ensuring that mentors submit their letters on time, and sort of having to follow up and ensure that character letter specifically, like those who are not within academic institutions, write one that is well thought. So I think I was very worried with a superficial letter from those who aren't necessarily affiliated with universities. But it's good to be proactive and to sort of email and to have internal deadlines to say, can you send this to me, within 2 weeks prior to the official deadline, just to make things a little bit less stressful for you.
I agree. And a few tips on that. One, I think it's really important when you're talking or approaching your recommenders to let them know what the cause that you're interested in. I'm sure that people who are recommending you have a very good understanding of all the things that make you who you are. And so helping them by saying that, in my case, I had a lot of experience in advocating for climate change conferences. I worked a little bit with diplomacy, and then my application was about education. And so my professors had no idea that I was using that as like my cause. And so I had to, in the email or even after a conversation with them when they've asked for it, I've told them that like the focus of my application is talking about education and mentorship actually, which is why Jagged and everything we're doing here is very close to my heart. And then another thing is I didn't necessarily always pick the professors that I got an A in their class. There's one specific professor that I don't know if he hated me, but we just didn't get along. And I think what he appreciated and what I appreciated about our conversations is that we both stood up for what we value, and how that informed the discussions that we had, yet we were still open to having those discussions. It wasn't always like you're wrong, I'm right, or he thinks that. He never made me feel like I'm wrong for having a different opinion, but he allowed me that space to discuss it. And I don't think I made him feel wrong. And I think when I approached him to write my recommendation letter, he was also surprised because he's like, you didn't do well. I was like, yeah, I know, but I think what I want you to talk about is the fact that in our discussions, for the 14 weeks that I had class with you, I never backed down from what I believed in. And it wasn't because it was unfounded in reasonable fact. It's just my perception of the world comes from a very different value system than his, which is why we came to different conclusions. And he actually ended up, I think, writing, according to the admissions office, the best recommendation letter for me. And it's because I picked someone who didn't necessarily know who I was, but someone who experienced what I was like when I was fighting for something that I personally believed in. So I think when you're picking your recommenders, make sure you have a certain experience or field or interest that aligns with them so that they can write something that's personal and strong about you as a person. Okay, I am...
To add, Meitha, I found it helpful to attach your CV and your personal statement and sort of like a short document, sort of short 500 words on your relationship with the potential mentor you're seeking out. It's good to reach out to them a month in advance or even earlier, a month and a half, because they do need a lot of time to write a letter.
I agree. I think it's one of the first things that I was happy to like tick on my to-do list was like send recommenders the emails, because the earlier if someone is down to write you a letter, the better, because then you can think about plan Bs if they're not available. On that, I'm going to move to the third topic, but the second part of the Rhodes application, because there are a few questions on that as well, which is, so after you submit your personal statement, your recommendations, and your CV, you are shortlisted with 9 to 10 people, and you're invited usually in non-COVID-19 days to His Excellency Zaki Nuseba's house for 2 days, where you are interviewed one-to-one with a panel of either previous Rhodes Scholars or prominent figures in the UAE. And the interview, I think those 2 days, if I can speak for everyone on this panel, were the longest 2 days of our lives. Every minute felt like it was a whole day trying to pass until it's your turn to get interviewed. So I would love to hear from everyone, actually. How did you prepare for those interviews?
I can go. if you'd like that. Okay, sure. If, I think what was most helpful for me, obviously there are things that like everyone's advised to do. So doing mock interviews is really important. Sitting a lot with yourself and thinking about, again, I'll go back to values, what your values are, why you're doing what you're doing in life. And I guess to make this more concrete or specific, what I did was I went, after having written my personal statement and submitted it, I went back to my personal statement aggressively, almost every day, just looking at it, every sentence, understanding why I said what I said. And if I was asked about a specific line, I ensured that I was able to say why I said that exactly, not something else. With the mock interviews, I found the most helpful ones to be interviews with people that didn't know me beforehand, because I felt like doing an interview with someone that knows you, you have to assume that they're going to like imbue their opinion of you with past experiences, as opposed to someone who, gets a first impression from you during the interview. So reach out to people that might not know you, professors that might not know you. That was the most helpful interview for me. And I also think like important things to do are, if you do get shortlisted and you have 10 days to prepare, important things to do are to finish your assignments as fast as possible, so that you're not pressed to balance both Rhodes prep and assignments before the weekend. And take care of yourself. So do whatever things you need to do to really make sure that you engage in self-care, whether that be reading books or watching films or going for runs or having tea. I did all of those things and they were really helpful. Yeah.
I agree with Abdullah. Just to build on that before Amal and Mohammed share their experience, I remember I think you get like 1 week or like 10 days that they inform you that you're going to have an interview. And for me, I stopped preparing on day 6 or 7. Like consciously, I was like, stop looking at your personal statement, stop talking to professors about this, because it just felt like I was overwhelming myself and becoming robotic with my answers. Because I was just grilling myself this whole time. And I think one thing that really matters in the interviews is that you stay natural, you stay true to yourself, and your values wouldn't have changed within the past month. The application process and the interview are not too far apart. I think it takes like a month or a month and a half when they inform you for the interviews. So as long as you wrote something that is honest and true to yourself, it wouldn't be a challenge for you to speak about it in the interviews. I think a lot of us tend to a little bit over prepare just because you want something really bad. But I think that can also sometimes be harmful for yourself because you overwhelm yourself, or you tend to lose the authenticity that comes with the statement that you have so beautifully written that has got you to be shortlisted for the scholarship. Hamad or Amal, you want to share how you prepared for the interviews or a certain experience with the interviews?
Unless you want to start. In addition to what Abdullah did, which was sort of the mock interview process that I found actually the most helpful, I started mind mapping on one of my roommate's walls. So I had like Post-its, and I would just, pick up certain themes from my personal statement or certain values that I had, written down as well in my CV. So I would just sort of start with a word and different Post-its and branch out with news articles or personal opinions that I had that I thought was sort of helpful in understanding myself and my interests from a visual lens. When I twisted my ankle, I moved on to pen and paper, and that was actually helpful too, because it was a concise form of sort of visualizing my my answers. But I think ultimately, like, you really do have to try multiple methods. Like, there is no one specific method that it would help, and it would help everyone. I think mock interviews are definitely close to that, but we're all quite different. And I would maybe just recommend one specific value, which is called priming. Professor Meidabert told me about this, and I found it very useful. So priming is this idea that prior to any significant event, so like this is a few minutes before your interview, you're super nervous, you can't stop shaking your leg. you essentially, you close your eyes and you think of a very happy moment in your life, and you let that fill in your body from head to toe. And so you walk in confident, you walk in easy, you're about to see your friends, you know, you're sitting on a couch, everything's comfortable, to make sure that, you know, that all that effort and all that time is actually translated onto the panel.
I definitely agree about the priming. I didn't know there was a word for it. But I remember I was telling myself when I was in Zaki's house, I'm like, this is your uncle's house. Relax. You're here for a casual Friday chat that you usually have, you know, with 8 people staring at you. You're here with your closest friends and cousins. And I had to like keep reiterating it to myself so that I don't turn into like, you know, like sweating and shaking the whole time. And I think what helps, honestly, the people that get shortlisted, and this is from my experience, are all very genuine and they all have so many exciting things to talk about. And so for me, a good distraction was we actually all sat down in the living room, and whenever the person went for an interview, like another person would sit and tell us their story. Like, what are they passionate about? You know, what is their cause? What do they want to work? You know, how did they apply to Rhodes? And so it was like it was a nice get together and like getting to know new people. So I think that was a good distraction as well that we had in our like interview sessions. Okay, Mohammed, you want to share a little bit about your interview experience and how you prepared for it?
Yeah, sure. I agree with everything that's been said so far about this. That all resonated true with me, especially what Metha said um, about wanting to, you know, think of this as, don't take it, try not to be too nervous, try to think of this as going to your uncle's house, that sort of thing. And I remember telling myself to enjoy this experience for what it is. You know, don't think of this as being a test. Think of this as a prize for being a finalist. Go in with that kind of attitude. So that'll help you be calm. That'll help you make the most of that day, regardless of the outcome. I think all of the finalists that day really enjoyed the experience, regardless of regardless of the actual result. So yeah, I just think this is a celebration of the fact that they thought your personal statement was so good they wanted to meet you. So see it in that light.
Exactly. And so now they just want to meet who you are, the person behind the amazing personal statement. Mohammed, sorry, someone is asking about the questions that you were asked during the interview. They're not asking Mohammed specifically, but I think Mohammed has a very interesting story about the questions that he was asked. And I think it really highlights how Rhodes is as, you know, a scholarship and what they look for.
So I think the hardest question I received, or certainly the most memorable, I was asked for my thoughts on data collection, surveillance, data privacy, user privacy, that sort of thing. And I remember when I got that question, I was thinking in my head really quickly as to what is the right answer to this. And I didn't spend that long, but it felt like a long time. The reason is I could argue for either point depending on what position I needed to take. You know, I could answer with the idealistic, you know, user privacy is of paramount importance, or I could answer with the more pragmatic, data is very useful. It could be used to bring benefit to a greater number of people. But then I realized they didn't ask me what is right. They asked me what my personal thoughts were. And my personal thoughts were and still are is that this sort of thing has always happened historically in human society for as long as, you know, for as long as we've been existing. You know, there are examples of more archaic versions of this happening in the Middle Ages and all the way back to antiquity. So I answered with that sort of answer, and I gave an example of a case that happened in the Middle Ages. And yeah, that's how I handled that question.
Amazing. I think all of us, when we're preparing for these interviews, prepare maybe over 200 questions, and then none of those questions show up. It's always questions that you never expected. I can share a personal experience with me. They asked me, so my personal statement was all about education, increasing the quality, and how in the 21st century, there's a very big disconnect from the way that we're being taught versus how we learn and what we learn, or what we need to learn to survive this constantly changing world. And then out of the blue, after all the questions, some of them asked me about, being a Muslim hijabi in the UK, which is fine, like something I was fine answering. Someone asked me, if you could change education overnight, what would you do? And I gave my ideal scenario. And then randomly, someone asked me, what are your thoughts on World War I? And I was just like so confused. But I think one thing to emphasize here is that in the interview, there is, I don't want to say it's a goal, but they're trying to throw you off. They want to make you nervous. They want to, see if there is something that you wouldn't be able to answer. I don't know if Abdullah or Amal had a random question that they wanted to share from their experience.
I'll go. This was the first question I got, and I just remember it exactly, Nathan, like what you were saying. It's not in my 200 list of questions, and it wasn't anywhere near my application actually, but it was extracted from a recommendation letter, because the professor who had written it had taught me this class 2 years ago. And they had asked me if I think Islam and social movements should hold political power. And I just remember thinking, well, I framed the different kinds of political Islamist organizations available and then stated my opinion, but that sort of like threw me off. You really could prepare, 500 or 1,000 questions and none of them can show up. The best thing about interview preparations is that it's a skill. It's sort of, at this point, you can get any question and you wouldn't mind answering it. It's all relative, and I think it's like a muscle that you just sort of can apply to a different context. But yeah, I remember that question and the conversation, moved in that range as well. Like I didn't get any question that I prepared for, but it was exciting. I liked being in that room. I really.
Amal, you muted yourself, I think, Bilala.
No, sorry. That was it. Unless you have anything else.
No, that's great. I definitely agree with you. When you leave, you're like, okay, that was a good conversation, rather than an interrogation, which is a great part of the Rhodes interview. Okay, on that, I'm going to conclude Rhodes specific questions. And I think we have a lot of questions on Oxford, on applying to grad school. Why did you even decide to go to grad school? I think most of us are fresh graduates who, after our bachelor degree, straight went into postgrad. A lot of people are asking about, our work experiences. Did they help with our applications? When did we decide to apply to Rhodes? Sorry, I just threw a bunch of questions at you guys. I'm going to break it down. I think what the first question, let's think of it as a timeline, is when did you decide to apply to a grad school and maybe why?
I think for me, it was, well, very early on, I knew I was going to go to grad school. I did not know, so I was probably in my third year. I did not know where or what, or, I didn't have any details yet, but I was certain that I wanted to go to grad school. And I think the main reason for me was I felt that I haven't had enough learning and I wanted to do some more. Not to say that people who graduate don't do learning, but I kind of still wanted that learning within a university type of environment. Obviously, grad school has a different experience than undergrad. But I think for me, that was the first moment I realized, yeah, I want to continue doing this.
Amazing. And when did you start applying for Rhodes?
So as I said this, I think in the beginning of the session, that I was originally thinking about applying for the class of 2016, but then I knew I was not going to graduate by then anyway. So the year after that, so it was the summer of 2016, because in 2016 you apply for class of 2017, right? So it was in the summer, fall of 2016 that I started to apply for Rhodes to join the class of 2017. Yeah.
Amazing. I think I honestly have a similar experience to Mohammed. I wanted to just learn more, and I think my university experience, or I only found out what I'm really passionate about at the end of my university experience. So I wanted to dive into education a bit more, look into public policy, in a more systematic way rather than a theoretical way, which is what I studied in undergrad. Which is why I did my master's in public policy and education. And for me, I remember I wrote my first draft for Rhodes in May and then never looked at it ever again up until August, because I knew I wanted to apply, but then I just had too many questions for myself. Like, is this what I want to do? Maybe I should work for a year. And so within those 2 months, every time I tried to give myself reason not to apply, I found a reason why I should apply. And so by August, I was like, okay, khalas, I know I want this. And I started working on my application. I think I dedicated like literally 2 to 4 hours every day working on it. And then I would take like 1 week breaks so that I can refresh my perspective on it. Abdallah or Amal, do you want to share about why you decided to do grad school?
Sure. With regards to like applying for grad school, as a kid growing up, because my dad has a PhD, I was like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to get a PhD as well. Yeah, that was the kind of very childish, just looking up to dad kind of thing. And then I went into NYUAD, and I thought to myself, okay, I'm not sure if I want to do grad school. I'll have to see if it works for me, because it's very easy for a kid to say I'm going to dedicate so much to doing a master's degree and then getting a PhD, but it's a large part of your life. And if you don't have a more compelling reason than dad did this, so I want to do this as well, then like you can't really base your life choices on that. So I remember hearing about the Rhodes Scholarship in freshman year, and I thought, you know what, wouldn't it be cool if I could apply for that and get it? But I quickly pushed that aside because I didn't think I had any shot of getting the scholarship. I was too intimidated by it as a freshman. And then I just decided to do what interested me in during my undergrad. Doing internships, volunteering, taking classes I liked. And naturally, I think after having done that, towards the end of my second or third year, I just thought, you know what, it feels like the right career, like the right progression to that would be to pursue postgrad or graduate education, and specifically for the same reason that Hamid had mentioned, which is I didn't feel like I knew enough. And it's not like people at my level didn't know enough. It's just that I didn't feel confident with the amount of knowledge that I had, and so I felt like I needed to acquire more. And I looked at different programs that provided me with an opportunity to gain that knowledge, but it was the fact that Rhodes provided the academic side of what my goals were, as well as this additional part, like something like the character service and leadership program, as well as just connecting you with people that are also highly motivated to solve these issues. I just felt like it worked, and I took a shot and I got it. Yeah.
Amazing. Amel, I don't know if you want to share your experience or talk a little bit more about your work experience, whether it was internships or extracurriculars, and how that either influenced your decision or the field that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I had done a few internships with the private sector, sort of with Unilever and with McKinsey, and I realized that I really liked the rigorous methods employed within the private sector, but I also, benefited a lot from working with the Crown Prince Court in Abu Dhabi, the Office of Strategic Affairs, and understanding that there's a multi-disciplinary lens to approaching problems related to sustainable development and the economy. I was very interested in working with the law, sort of looking at the international legal lens, working with Professor Byrne at the legal department as her research assistant, made me realize that, you know, academia is something that I think could be a very valuable perspective when it comes to problem solving. And I think the application side of data analytics is something that I'm currently pursuing and looking as to how we can bring different voices and different knowledge bodies together. But when it came to the scholarship and like postgraduate education, I thought, to be honest, that like I wasn't qualified enough to like meet the criteria. Like I kept sort of like second guessing myself and thinking, well, I can sort of just easily apply to Oxford and see if like they'll accept me. You know, I don't necessarily have to apply to this scholarship. It was kind of like a mind game. And then eventually, like my friend earlier who I mentioned, you know, we were sitting at a coffee shop and she was applying to a different constituency and she said, I meant like, why not you? You know, she's like, my mom's been encouraging me too, so I'm going to be your mom for today and like encourage you as well. So yeah, it was a month prior to senior year and I like sat down and wrote a few iterations. But I think the really unique aspect about postgraduate education is that it could be very specialized, very nuanced. And I think that gives you an edge when you sort of enter the labor market to have a more richer understanding of your field.
I agree with that last point. I see Khalid has his hand up. I don't know, John or Salim, if we can unmute him and he can ask his question.
Hi, yes, I'm muted. Before I ask my question, I just want to say that I'm sure I can speak on behalf of Jagged that I am extremely happy with how this panel talk is going. I'm sure that everyone attending is finding it extremely helpful and informative. And just a shout out to the team and to all the panelists for bringing this together. Now, my question is, we've talked a lot about what happens before the application, what happens during the application, and what happens sort of like, you know, after the whole like program, and then what sort of edge it gives you in the when you're applying for jobs. But what I'm sort of interested in is what happens when you start off with the program. So my specific question, and this goes out to any of the panelists who may want to answer, is that when you started the program, when you started going to Oxford and began your postgraduate studies, was it an easy or smooth transition? Did you face any difficulties? Were there any surprises along the way? Just anything sort of towards that line?
I'm really glad you asked that. Do we want to start with the youngest and then move up, or do we want to start with a more reflective experience with Muhammad? So it's between Muhammad or Abdullah. Which one of you guys wants to start? Muhammad, go.
I think for me, when I first started, it was a bit challenging. I'm not gonna lie, but I think primarily it wasn't surprising. I was expecting it to be challenging, and I think it was challenging for me because I had jumped straight from doing my bachelor's degree, straight from undergrad, to doing a completely research-based DPhil PhD. So the engineering science program in Oxford doesn't have any courses, so you jump straight on to doing research. So it was so it was a transition that I was not used to. I hadn't really done much research before then. So it took me a bit of a while to get used to how things are like, but you know, time and my supervisor was very supportive for me. I don't think I actually did anything productive in my first semester. The first semester was just me trying to figure out what is going on, what is this place, what am I doing here. But eventually, things with time and patience and hard work, things get sorted.
Abdullah, I see you laughing hysterically. Abdullah started 2 months ago now? 3?
Yeah, so we had like at least for my program, Economics for Development program, it's a 9-month program. And before we started, we had something like a week-long refresher course, a math refresher course, which was pretty nice. But yeah, I wouldn't say I am completely lost, but there are definitely times where I feel lost. It's just, you know, it's way more fast-paced than I was used to in undergrad. And it doesn't help that every semester or every term is 8 weeks long. And so usually, you know, at least in my undergrad, it was like the first 2 weeks you take to kind of ease into the course. Whereas here, you know, two days in, I'm trying to ease into the course and we've already covered so much material and I just feel so behind. And so it took a bit of a while for me to be able to, you know, just understand that I need to stay on top of things and that it'll require way more deliberation from my side. Like I needed to be deliberate to stay on top of things. And I think, you know, things are just made exponentially more difficult with the pandemic, given that you know, you're sitting in a class with students that you don't really know and a professor that you haven't really socialized with. And so it might feel intimidating or frightening to kind of ask questions when you don't understand something, especially given that you know, if you're going to the master's program, you're probably surrounded by people who have had work experience. And so you might think that, you know, you might feel something like an imposter syndrome. But it's been really nice. It's obviously been challenging, but it's been rewarding. Yeah, I don't know. Ask me in another 5 months and see how I'm doing.
I'm glad you're not hating the experience.
I love
You feel very optimistic. That's great. Amal, do you want to share your experience now, 1 year in, a retrospect or a reflection on how your initial few months were like pre-pandemic? And if you can share some tips as well. Some people are asking, you know, Abdullah mentioned that you have to consciously be deliberate about staying on top of things. If there were any other tips that you might have, Amal.
The beautiful thing about coming into Oxford, like as a Rhodes Scholar, is that on your first day here, you meet with an upperclassman who sort of has a conversation with you. And I was so grateful to like, you know, meet Maitha and talk to her about transitioning potentially from a degree into a different program. And she sort of like encouraged me to do that. And so I had, you know, drafted another application and sent it to the Department of Education and was in the same class with Maitha my first year. You could propel you forward and help create a more stable atmosphere. So I was in the Department of Education and under sort of a very British style of teaching that I wasn't accustomed to. I think like my background was primarily related to an American education system. And so even at a postgraduate level, that seemed a little difficult for me to navigate, I think. A very hands-off system. And so I slowly started to curate my own educational experience by meeting with professors, proactively engaging with the people, the DPhils who are there, the other master's students who are there. There's a lot of unstructured opportunities available that you really need to carve out for yourself. I really enjoyed the readings and I really enjoyed the diverse perspectives that people brought to the table. That wasn't necessarily like the main focus of each lecture. And so you really kind of have to, the onus is on you to seek that out. But I really liked it, yeah. Aside from COVID, which has been a bummer, but I like being in Oxford. Like even, I know Mohammed's zooming in from the UAE, but I would highly recommend that those who are seeking to apply to the scholarship or seeking to
Did we lose Amal or is it just me? We did. Okay. Amal? Okay. I think to conclude Amal's part, she was just talking about, you know, being in Oxford physically. I think the place is very exciting. I think it definitely promotes a lot of curiosity because everything around you is so old and you never know the story of every building that's there, every hallway. I think for me, walking around town was a learning experience. Even until now, like I feel like if I go back, like there's so much more to learn about the history. One thing on my first year experience is I went into the public policy course, which usually requires previous work experience. And the average age of people was 28, and I was 21. And I think my biggest challenge was being taken seriously, because everyone in the course just viewed me as the child of the course, and they'll be like, oh, let Maytha have an opinion, but never really take me seriously. And I think that made me grow a lot of personal resilience and like perseverance of like, I actually have something to say, you know, like, and I want to be taken seriously just like everyone else around here. And I think that for me was the biggest challenge. And it was a lot of days of like, it was ups and downs and days of going home and being like, I can't take this class anymore. Like, no, because you just go from being a senior at university where everyone comes to you and you're like, you know everything. And then you're suddenly in a place where you don't know anything. And you have to kind of find your place within that. So I think that for me was the biggest challenge. But also the most exciting part was literally walking around town and just learning about everything around you. We have about 15 minutes left. We have a few questions here that are a bit more, I don't know if to call them logistical, but for example, one question is, were you all straight A students? Yeah, same, Abdullah, I don't think we were. The unique thing about Rhodes is that they don't necessarily, I mean, being academically high achieving is important, but it's not the only thing they look at. They really look at your personal statement, your various activities, what are the things you are passionate about and would advocate for. Someone is asking, how are the professor-student relationships at Oxford in general, and how would you describe the Rhodes community? I think we have two different perspectives. In an MSc, it's very different than a DPhil. So if Amal or Abdullah want to share that, and then Muhammad can share his DPhil really like professor-student relationship.
I think it's too early for me to say, so I'd prefer Amal take this one.
I don't know if Amal is having...
Absolutely, sorry, my Wi-Fi is incredibly slow today. At the MSc level, and I think this based on your department, you really have a small cohort of students, but the British tends to be hands off, and so you might be able to develop a better relationship during office hours or via one-on-one meetings online as opposed to in classrooms. But I think they do get a sense of who you are and what your interests lie just via the classroom discussions. They're not, they're not what you might expect, I think, within American education system where they're like friendly and they have time for you. The prioritization of research.
I think we lost Amal. But yeah, I'm just going to reiterate what she was saying. It's not your usual close relationship with your professors. I think it requires a lot of effort from your side to be heavily engaged with the professors. There's definitely a distance, I think. And that's on the MSc kind of taught courses. Mohammed, what's your experience doing the PhD?
I think with the PhD, it's highly variable with what lab you're part of and who's your supervisor. So there isn't any kind of standard protocol of how this sort of thing would happen in Oxford. For me personally, it is, well, very quickly you'd end up forming a close relationship with your supervisor simply because you see them often enough. Especially in my case, in the year I started, my supervisor was officially on a sabbatical, so she did not have any teaching to do. So she was always in the lab. And that allowed me to, and I was also very fortunate that I literally sat right outside of her office. So, I'd always see her, she'd always see me. So that really helped me become slowly an important member of her team. But yeah, I think it's highly variable. And I think it's a good idea to, when applying, and not just in Oxford, but if you're applying for a PhD in general, just to ask your supervisor or some of your supervisors, students or postdocs, what's the meeting schedule like? How regular do you meet? How does this sort of thing happens? Are there group meetings? Do you work independently? Is there a lot of inter-team kind of work that happens in addition to everyone's solo project? So these are sort of things that it'd be a good idea to ask if you're in a position to ask them.
Definitely. I think this also translates to the MSc experience. If you know people who are in the course, definitely reach out to them and they'll give you a lot. Maybe if they're currently in the course, they can tell you exactly how it's going and what the relationship is like. I think it's hard to also generalize. I definitely had personal relationships with some professors in my first degree, but I think it definitely, the general idea is that there isn't a lot, but it requires personal effort. Okay, the last question is if someone can share their experience on the application process to get into Oxford. So just to clarify one last thing is when you apply to the scholarship, you become, and if you get it, you become a scholarship elect, which means that you're still not 100% Rhodes Scholar, you're like 90% Rhodes Scholar, and the 10% is that you need to get into Oxford. And they usually pick people who they know would get into Oxford, but it's a separate application from your scholarship application. So you apply to the course directly. You're usually encouraged to apply to 2 courses to make sure that you get into at least one of them, and then your second year you would apply to a different one. I think this is different if you're doing a PhD. You probably only apply to one program, Mohammed.
It was a bit different for me. I can talk about it if you want me to talk about it. Should I go ahead, or do you have more you'd like to say?
That was the last question. If you can give us a quick overview, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I think for me I had a very interesting journey after I got the scholarship and I was still in the process of applying. I had originally wanted to do a master's in computer science. And like you said, they do recommend us to apply for more than one program, right? I applied for 3. And the thing is, I got rejected from all 3. I had applied from a master's in computer science, a master's in the MPP, and a master's, social science of the internet. But then again, in May, there was a window to apply for additional programs. So I applied for the engineering science, which was actually the closest to my degree, computer engineering. And I, thankfully got in and I was accepted. But what I'm trying to say is, even if you get rejected from your first, the first couple of programs you're applying for, keep applying. Until it's very end, just keep applying and apply for as many programs as you can. I don't think you have a limit, really. So if you have a bunch of programs that look alike, just apply for them all.
Yeah, and Rhodes does offer help when you're applying to programs. So after you become a Rhodes elect, you will get support from the Rhodes House on your application process for Oxford. On that, I would like to thank all our participants and our panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time off of a Saturday to have this conversation with us. I'd also like to plug in Jagged if you don't follow us already on the Instagram and Twitter, and you'll find a lot of the information that we spoke about, as well as this recorded session uploaded on there as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Meitha. Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Rabia, Abdullah, Muhammad, and Jonathan. And of course, to the Jagged team.
Yeah, I can't top that. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.